when you tell people what you're doing, when you tell people that you facilitate labyrinths, how do they respond?
Most people are actually interested enough to, people who ask are interested enough to know a little bit more. So they ask what it is. Possibly I get quite excited about it, but I've had really positive responses like, oh, I would love to do that, or that sounds fascinating. And some people, I've noticed a lot of artist friends have done it. They're kind of quite good at doing it. So, yeah. The Labyrinth has been really interesting. You find it in architecture, history, literature, art, psychology. It's all there. It's there. Now that you've had this discussion, you'll see the labyrinths everywhere.
Yeah. And why is that?
Because it's an archetypal pattern.
So what are those two specific patterns you mentioned?
There's also the Roman labyrinth, and there's another one, I've forgotten the name. There's a few. They're basically just the variations of the same theme. So there's kind of a very basic pattern, which is interesting in itself. Jeff C. would suggest that it comes from the cosmos, watching of the stars. Some people suggest it comes from sacred geometry. Almost everybody who argues the origin have a really strong argument and a strong point of where it's come from. So I suppose it's just a pattern that has been adapted by humans, and it seems to be a reflection of nature and what's there in nature anyway, which is probably why it works so powerfully, because it's already there in our natural surroundings.
So when people sign up and come along to do a walk, do you have a sense of why they're signing up, what their expectations are, or anything like that?
I don't really, but I think that people that is an interesting thought, because people who've signed up to come are expecting something. They might have high hopes and be disappointed, or they might not be expecting much other than just a nice meeting with like-minded people, or something that will help them find some peace and quiet and calm, or an answer to problems. But also, I find what's really interesting are the people who say no and refuse to come on the walks, because I find that interesting in itself. And when I went on my walk, and I was reflecting on this for my autobiography recently, I couldn't wait. I was so excited, and I'd spent a whole day listening to them talk about the labyrinth and the whole morning, desperate to get to the point where it was my turn. I fell on my knees and I cried, and I didn't want to go in. And I was overtaken with this feeling of I don't want to walk, I don't want to do it. And then it was like, Karen, there's like people behind you in the queue. You're making a fool of yourself. You've got to go in. And I went in. Well, the walk, because as soon as I got in and I started walking, I immediately reverted to my childhood. And I actually don't think I wanted to be born. I think I had a really traumatic time in the womb. And it was like, oh my God, I didn't ask for life. I didn't want to be born. It was too scary. I was overwhelmed. And when I walked it, I went to my first 5 years of my childhood, and then I started to see all the beautiful things that I couldn't remember, and it suddenly opened up all the positive things. And then I just physically was thinking about all of these things when the path changed 180 degrees, and I started to cry again. And that was reflected when I look back on my move in childhood, which I didn't want to make. And I started to cry again, as I did when I was a little 7-year-old girl. So I'm thinking, oh, it's really interesting, people who don't want to walk it. Maybe they have insight as to something big is here. It's like people who don't want to go to counselling. They know that it might reveal something that they're frightened of.
Well, there's two things going on in my head as we're talking. There's one part of me that's thinking, oh, that's too out there. We're getting right into the hippie shit. This is, my inner cynic is going, nah, don't like this. But then the other part of me is going, oh, maybe that's the answer to the cynicism, that when we're cynical about things, it's because we're frightened. that we might find out something we're not ready for. So I'm kind of grappling with those two things that are kind of overlapping and contradictory at the same time.
Yeah.
What you think?
I think that's spot on, Rachel, because that's what I feel as I've been reflecting on it. And when I did a presentation at university, I was discussing it with my tutor and saying, this is like too out there. It's like, oh my God, this is too deep. This is like, and it reminded me very much of Carl Jung's Little Red Book. It's like way out there. But on the other hand, people who don't want to walk it know it's way out there, but they'll know at the same time it makes sense of what's way out there in a way that, oh my God, I don't want to know that yet. I'm not ready for it.
Mm. So have you had experiences with other people who've refused to do it?
Oh yeah, I've had a few people who've actually said, oh no, it's not for me. And I've had one or two who said, I'm not ready for it yet. And it was the comments like that made me reflect and then made me think recently about my own experience, thinking, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I'd like to explore that from a research perspective, ask people who don't want to walk, why they don't want to walk.
Yeah. So when people have said it's not for me, have they kind of gone into it in any more detail?
No, that's as far. Well, I don't push people. I let people be. If they say it's not for me, that's fine. And I think that it might be for them at a later date, or it might not be. It's been profound for me, and the people who've walked it, generally, I've never had a bad experience of anyone who's walked it. They've never said anything negative to me, anyway, put it that way. But that could be because they're actually open to those experiences. Why would you walk? Why would you do it if you think it's a load of rubbish and you're not interested?
But why would you be frightened of it if you thought it was a load of rubbish?
You wouldn't. Yeah, well, I think so. That's why I think it's an interesting area for research, because I never went for counselling when I was in a difficult marriage, because I knew counsellors would tell me to leave the marriage, and I was a good Christian girl, and that was not an acceptable answer. So I refused to go because I knew that they were going to highlight something, and I was right. And with hindsight, that's probably what would have happened had I gone for counselling. But I had to work that out in my own way, in my own time, which was another 15 years later.
So you mentioned having a Christian background. Are you still a practicing Christian?
No, that was one of the problems I had in 2000, because I lost my Christian faith in a very dramatic way, which is not for here, an interview in its own right. And I spent the next 5 to 10 years looking for God and my Christian God. And I think the Labyrinth really helped me come to peace with losing my Christian faith altogether, and has given me that sense of peace that it was part of the journey that's made me who I am now, and it's formed my life, but it isn't for me now. So no, it'll be 20 years since I was Christian.
So it sounds like you found a different faith, but you've still got a faith.
Yeah, it depends. I don't really even like the word faith. Okay. And there are still losses in that. I have come to another place in my thinking where I've found peace with myself. I would go so far as to say I have found God resides in me, and I read recently whatever is that unpronounceable monk who's very famous on meditation. Yeah, I can't pronounce his name. Just a quote, he said, I believe God is in every living being. And I thought, well, there you go.
Yeah, I like that.
I liked it, and I thought, that's when I found all faith for me is irrelevant, but it got me to where I am today. It was a big part of my background. But, I'm not a Christian anymore.